Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
We're just gonna wait another minute or so to get everyone situated. If people are comfortable, for those who are joining in on Zoom, to if you're comfortable, for those who are joining in on Zoom, to let's try it again. For those of you who are joining in on Zoom, if you're comfortable in turning your video screens on, please do, so that we can incorporate some of what we're going to be doing, inshallah, in the breakout rooms. You'll be able to engage in discussion with each other and to be able to have more of a direct conversation with one another. But where you're not comfortable, that's fine as well. But we wanted to do this in such a way where people would also be able to kind of build some community, build some cohesion with one another. So anyone who does feel comfortable in doing that, please feel free to do so, inshallah. We're going to wait just for another minute or so, and then we'll get everyone going. Okay, Bismillah. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So for those who are not familiar, we're looking at a text called the Book of Assistance. It was written by a sheikh by the name of Imam al-Haddad, rahimahullah, who is known as a great spiritual master in our tradition. Imam al-Haddad was somebody who wrote numerous texts, numerous books. If you don't have a copy of the text, you can open it up very easily by looking up just online the Book of Assistance by Imam al-Haddad PDF, and you'll be able to find it fairly simply. And one of the more remarkable things about this text is that in very easily digestible chapters, it creates a roadmap for one's own spiritual growth. And when we talk about spirituality within the prism of Islam as a religion, we're not separating spirituality from religion the way that some religious traditions might do. So, for example, it's more common within the framework of modernity for individuals to hear or say things to the effect of that, I am spiritual, but I'm not religious, or something to that extent. This is not to knock anybody's beliefs in any way, but to be able to understand that within Islam, there's an emphasis put both on the outward as well as the inward. That it's not an either or, but it's a both and. And the way that we relate is by recognizing the importance of both. And quite often, when you have religion that is ritualistic, it can emphasize very easily the mechanics without necessarily understanding the importance of both the spirit of the law and the inward. And you can't leave behind either, but both fundamentally play a very critical role in our own development, in our relationship with Allah. And so, where and how do we illustrate some of these distinctions? A story that I've shared before that I think quite remarkably shows the distinction between somebody who is emphasizing more so externals, fiqh, what exists on a legalistic level, in comparison to one that looks at internals or is a person that focuses on the heart. We have, for example, a story of a sheikh who is sitting with his students, and as he is engaging his students, he says that, do you want to see the difference between somebody who is a scholar, a student of fiqh, or a student of the heart? And so the class, they say to the sheikh that, yes, we'd like to see what the difference is between these two individuals. And so the teacher, the sheikh, he says to the students that when your classmate walks in, when your peer walks in and gives you salam, don't return the salam. And the students, listening to their sheikh, they do what they're told, and they find that the student walks in and says, Assalamu alaikum. They don't respond with anything. They're silent. A second time now, their classmate says the salam, and then a third time again, he says the salam. And now when he has said it 3 times, he gets angry and agitated and says that, don't you know it's fard upon you to return my greeting? The sheikh now says to his class that when your next classmate walks in and gives you the salam, don't return their greeting, just as you didn't with the first one. And so the class again listens to the sheikh, and when their classmate walks in and gives the salam, he says, Assalamu alaikum, and nobody says anything. A second time, he now gives the salam, and a third time again, but rather than getting frustrated, the second student, who is the student of the heart, he says to his classmates that, did I do something to anger or offend you that you are not returning my greeting? And this is where the distinction was, that the student of fiqh, the student of externals only, was only able to find flaw in what others were doing. That the giving of the salam in the initial phase of it, that if I was to greet you, religiously speaking, it's categorized as a recommended act, not an obligation. But if someone was to give the salam, it now fits into an obligatory act in terms of it being a communal obligation. Somebody has to return that salam back to that individual. And the student of fiqh is illustrating this, saying that you're not doing what you're supposed to do, quote unquote. And now when the student of the heart comes in, the perspective is different. The depth of vision is different. They're able to understand or try to understand and connect to their classmates in a different way. And so rather simply than looking at what is most apparent and making an assessment off of that and removing themselves from the scenario, the heart will say that, how do I fit into this? And how do I understand meaning from it and substance to it? With modernity, we have a lot of growth and a lot of movement forward. We have individuals who are connected to each other globally at levels that is unlike anything people have seen over the course of the last decades, the last centuries. In interconnectivity, technology, there's so much growth and there's so much more that we can learn and know and understand. But what we find within it quite deeply is, with modernity as well, there is an opportunity to have an absence of perception or an absence of depth of perception. So for example, in our tradition, within the apocalyptic and eschatological narrations of the hadith, you find a character that's known as Dajjal, right? May Allah protect us from his fitna. And the Dajjal, in his descriptions, has many different characteristics that are identified, and one of them is that he is one-eyed. So to give deeper context, the Dajjal as an individual is seen as somebody who is the Antichrist type figure within Islam as a religion. And so the Dajjal is seen as somebody who represents great trial and tribulation. That's why we seek protection from his existence. And of the depictions given of him, the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessings be upon him, says that the Dajjal is said to be one-eyed. But in the Quran, in Surah Al-Balad, it says that we have been made with two eyes. Alam naj'al lahu aynayn, that have you not, we have made him with two eyes. And Dajjal being one-eyed and fitting into a genre of hadith that speaks of things that comes towards the end of time, gives us indication that beyond the literal sense, but in a more esoteric sense, his vision being one-eyed esoterically means that he can only see in one direction, whereas we are meant to be people who can see outwardly and inwardly. Dajjal can only see one way. And the idea is that with modernity, as we get closer to the end of time, that people will lose a depth of perspective. They're not going to be able to see as much as what it is that they are able to see. Because the vision is not simply a vision of the eye, but a vision of the heart. And a book like what we're looking at, Imam al-Haddad's text, is a text that enables us to have a strategy to create an understanding of who we are inwardly, but also how we take care of our inward with regular, consistent practice, reflection, contemplation, and engage in processes that will enable us to get deeper in self-knowledge, while we in turn, inshallah, get closer to understanding who Allah is, and ultimately assess for ourselves a sense of ethics and values and morals that guide our philosophy on life and our decision-making and choices as we move forward. And this is what spirituality does. An increase or decrease or stagnation or paralysis in it bears manifest impact just on choices and decisions that we make. And why am I saying all of this? Well, one, fundamentally, we want to understand as a either review or as an intro why we're doing this. And the consequence of it, or one of the potential consequences of it, is contentment, fulfillment. A balance inward and outward yields for us a stability and an understanding that is not simply confined to materialistic gain or happiness that exists external to us, but is able to be rooted in an inward that then impacts what it is that exists outwardly from us. Does this make sense? Yes? Great.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so we're going to be looking at the 13th chapter of the text. And what we want to be able to engage as we're looking at the 13th chapter of this is primarily we want to see where the book in and of itself fits into this roadmap that I'm talking about. So here, for example, you can see the table of contents. And for people who haven't been able to get the text itself, let me see if I can just put it into the chat function. You can just Google the Book of Assistance, Imam al-Haddad, and you will be able to find it in a lot of different places. And so when you see just the relationship here between even the sub-chapters, we're on chapter 13, the chapter on cleanliness, but when you can try to understand, well, how does something like certitude relate to intention, relate to vigilance, relate to the inner and the outer self, relate to regular devotions, the recitation of the Quran, acquiring knowledge, remembrance, reflection, the following of the Quran and the Sunnah, doctrine, religious obligations, and cleanliness. And as we go through the rest of the text, getting inshallah to the 27th chapter, to see how we don't separate things, but we see them in relation to each other and understand how they exist in that kind of framework. And so certainty has to be understood and revisited. Intention has to be. If you've been following along, we have a lot of the videos from the previous sessions still up online that you can go and take a look back on. But you don't want to see knowledge as separate from one another. You want to see knowledge as something that you fit into everything else. So, understanding yaqeen, certitude, in the framework of tahara, cleanliness. Understanding niyyah in the framework of cleanliness, intention. Understanding muraqabah, vigilance, in the framework of cleanliness. And trying to deepen perspective and prisms of understanding of the knowledge that we have by looking at it through multiple angles as opposed to just one. And so we're going to move to chapter 13, which is the chapter on cleanliness. Sorry, I'll scroll through this a little bit quicker. Oh, I think I missed it. And so we had read through the first few paragraphs on this in the last session. Can somebody just start us again from the beginning, but we'll stop at the parts that we had stopped at last time? Does anybody want to read from within the Zoom? Where it says, you must take care of your outward and inward cleanliness. You can unmute yourself and you can read from the text. Who would like to read for us? Anyone can feel free. Yeah, go ahead.
In what is it? 13th chapter. Sorry. Just you must on cleanliness. You must take care of your outward and inward cleanliness, for the one who is completely clean becomes inwardly and in a spiritual angel, although in his body and outward from a form he remains a physical human being. The messenger of God, may blessings and peace upon him, has said, religion is based on cleanliness, and God is clean and likes cleanliness. Inward cleanliness is achieved by purifying the soul from vile traits of character such as pride, ostentation, envy, love of the world, and other similar things, and by adorning it with noble traits of character such as humility, modesty, sincerity, generosity, and so forth. The true nature of these and the way to rid oneself of vile traits and acquire noble ones were recorded by Imam al-Ghazali in the second half of the Ihya. Know this and make use of it. And as for outward cleanliness, this depends on avoiding transgressions and keeping to obedience. The one who adorns his outward with English is not my mother tongue.
No, you're doing great, mashallah.
With perseverance and good works in his inward, with taking on praiseworthy attributes, has completed his cleanliness. Otherwise, he would only have a share of it proportionate in his remoteness of reprehensible traits, acts, and nearness to good ones.
That's great. Yeah, we can stop there. Jazakallah khair.
Okay.
And so this is kind of where we had stopped, and we now move into a direction where we start to talk about specifics, right? So Imam al-Haddad moves into among the divisions of outward cleanliness are those things indicated in the law, such as removing excessive hairs and nails, for instance, and dirt, and purification from acts which necessitate the ritual ablution and impurities. Amongst these are the removal of pubic hair, depilation or shaving of the armpits, clipping the mustache, and the paring of the fingernails. It is recommended to start with the right index finger, carry on the to the right little finger, then to the left little finger, through to the left thumb, and end with the right thumb. And so here, what we're finding now are particular matters that Imam al-Haddad is highlighting for us to engage in the framework of outward cleanliness. For a lot of us, our relationship to these types of things becomes quite routine, and then unfortunately can become quite mechanical. We get to a sphere where we're not necessarily engaging it with mindfulness or presence, but we're engaging it in a way where there's still benefit. We're fulfilling like the steps, but it's very easy to let go of the deeper gains, because these are all acts that most of us, whether we're born into Islam or have come to it at a later point in life, likely have engaged, right? When you're learning anything, the first thing you learn is wudu, because if you don't have wudu or you don't know how to make wudu, you can't pray your prayers. You can't engage the mushaf in certain ways. There's a lot that goes into it. And so the challenge becomes how to not make the outwardly cleansing rituals the means to spiritual vehicles, but to see the ritual cleansing in and of itself as also a spiritual vehicle. That where Imam al-Haddad is speaking about these things and is telling us that, okay, here, for example, we have